Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Gary Allen, and today we're talking about best-in-class compensation, about how to create the right alignment and incentives in your law firm compensation system. This webinar is approved for ALA, Association of Legal Administrators, CLM, application and recertification credit for 1 hour toward your financial management requirements. So for those of you who are ALA members, you have that available to you. And for those of you who aren't, let me just tell you a little bit about ALA. We've been involved at LeanLaw for about 2 years, and we're really impressed with this organization. And it's really about two things. One is education, and the other is community. You can get really great educational opportunities at ALA, including a certificate of legal management, which is a comprehensive course on how to be a legal administrator. And then you have continuing education like this available all the time, both through the national ALA and through your local chapter. What most impresses me about ALA is the community that they've built. That, a lot of times, especially mid-sized firms, you don't have a lot of company or in your regular community about what you're doing. So people feel lonely. They don't know where to go with questions. ALA provides that outlet. And I think that's what I hear from ALA members is that is one of the most valuable things about it. So if you're interested in ALA membership at all, just write your name and your city and state in the chat, and we will have an appropriate person from ALA get in touch with you. So thanks so much for being here. So just a little bit about me. My name's Gary Allen. I recently retired from practicing law after 35 years. I'm mostly at the end of most of the end of my career, I was at a mid-sized firm in Boise, Idaho with 40 attorneys. But early on in my career, I experienced a lot of pain from bad business practices, including 2 law firms that imploded while I was there. One I will never forget, where I received a call from the managing partner telling me that the office was closing on Monday and that I was without a job. I had a 6-month-old baby at the time. I was fortunate to land in an exceptional firm that was really well run and really profitable. And I learned a lot in that. And that's the purpose of this webinar and the whole series of webinars that we're putting on, is how to make your law firm into a better business. And I'm really passionate about that. And along the way, I also founded LeanLaw, which is a legal billing software company, which integrates deeply with QuickBooks Online to make QuickBooks work for small to mid-sized law firms. So let's dive into our what we're talking about today. So what you're going to understand after this webinar, first is what we call the 3 Ps for best-in-class financial performance. That's people, product, and process. And our focus today is on best-in-class compensation, about getting the right alignment and incentives on your compensation system in the firm. That's a really critical element of becoming a more productive and profitable firm. So what are those 3 Ps? I'll just load them all up here. That starts with people. And we're going to talk about some of those elements today, but at the beginning, it's culture. You have to have a culture that supports production and profitability. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. And that has to align with your compensation system. If people, feel like they're not getting, those things don't work together, that creates a lot of friction and a lot of problems in your firm. A topic we're not talking about today, but which is critical, is succession. so that the firm can be a long-term solution for everyone who's there, young or old, so that they can meet their career goals in the firm. When we talk about product, typically we've been talking about billable hours and hourly billing. It's important to be a little more creative than that now and to understand your market better. So in other webinars, we will talk more about how to do that. We will talk about pricing your products and services in a way that really works for the marketplace. And we'll also talk about the right kind of marketing for your firm, whether it's a business to consumer firm, where you might be more internet based, or in a business to business firm, where your marketing is going to be more referral based. So it's important to understand and use the right tactics in your firm. Finally, we'll talk about the processes in your firm. And that really comes down to three things. One is overhead, that a lot of firms are burdened by very high overhead, and that affects the profitability. It affects the relationships with your people, so it's harder to keep your best producers. So that's should be an area of focus in your firm. Technology, keeping it streamlined and simple, but still doing the essential things that you need. That's really important for a mid-sized firm. And then at a certain level, documenting, let's see, I'm sorry about that. I got a little off on my slide. Wanted to pull that up. But documenting and following those processes at kind of the 80-20 rule. So out of 20% of the work, you get 80% of the benefit. And you want your processes to work that way. The big message here is you need a relatively simple system if it's going to work in a mid-sized firm. You can't have a giant corporate bureaucracy, and you can't have anarchy either in your firm. So you need to hit the right middle note, the Goldilocks note on that, so you can have a firm that's relatively self-executing, because lawyers want to practice law. They don't want to spend a lot of time on management. They don't want, and every hour they spend on management is an hour that's lost when it comes to lawyer productivity. So that's what our whole series is going through. And let me just show you, forecast a little bit where we're going with that, and then we'll dive into performance and compensation. So we've already completed our financial report card webinar. If those of you who weren't here, that's going to be available in a community that we're putting together. Or if you want to get a copy of that, just put in the chat report card and we'll send you that webinar. Today we're talking about compensation and alignment and incentives. In September and October, we're going to turn in September, we're going to talk about technology and a new way to think about how to create a best-in-class system as opposed to the all-in-one system that we've been hearing about for the last many decades. And we think it's a better way to put your technology together. October and November, our focus is going to be on people, finding and hiring in October, cultivating and retaining in November. And then in December, and January, we're going to turn back to technology. We'll have a session on security and how that works in a best-in-class system. January, we'll talk about AI and the transformations that is bringing, and it will bring more in the future. February and March, we turn to product and marketing. So how to create innovative products and services, how to market them properly in your firm. And then in the second quarter, April, we're going to talk about leadership. What does a successful leadership team look like in a law firm? And that's not just lawyers, that's lawyers and administrative staff together to create a winning team. And in May, We're going to talk about partnerships and all of the foibles that you have to deal with there. And then in June, I want to kind of bring this back to a higher purpose. So ultimately, we're all here to serve the rule of law and the legal profession. How can we help to elevate those things? They're definitely in trouble, and we need to think about how we can make those institutions work better. Okay, so that's a little overview of that. Now we're talking here about best-in-class performance as it relates to a best-in-class compensation system. I want to give you just a few minutes about what that means, how that works, to give you context for our later discussion. So how do law firms make money? It's really very simple. It's revenue minus overhead equals profit. And then within that, you have 5 elements of profit that you need to think about. Capacity, utilization, realization. So capacity is how much that you can produce if you're producing at full tilt. Utilization is the percentage of that capacity you utilize. Realization is how much of that utilized time you can bill. Collection is, of course, how much you collect. Sorry, I hit the wrong side of this again. Let me cue that up again. And then finally, overhead as a percentage of revenue. So overhead, that's the costs that you offset against your revenue. It's most important relative to the amount of revenue you have. If you have 150,000 per lawyer in overhead, that's not very much if your lawyers produce $1 million a year in revenue. But if they produce 250 or 300,000, then it's a whole lot, and you need to look at that very carefully. Okay, so that's a little bit of that overview. So when we now say, in terms of this performance, what does it matter? So I want to illustrate this in what I call the tale of 2 lawyers. So 2 identical lawyers. One is average in their performance for the key metrics of a law firm. The other is a top performer. So what's the difference? When we look at capacity, for this, we're going to assume that the capacity is the same for both. But there is another phase of this analysis where you learn how to increase the capacity and actually decrease the number of hours that it costs to produce it. But so now if we look at utilization, well, we've make this assumption about capacity. The lawyer works 2,400 total hours, so 50 hours a week, roughly. 1,800 of that is billable, so $300 an hour. That's $540,000 in capacity. And that's the same here in this example between an average and best in class. Now, the utilization rate, which is the total of those total hours that are billed, I couldn't really believe this number when I read it, but I've looked into it and I think it's correct. The average lawyer produces 45% of their 45% of their capacity is utilized. In a best-in-class firm, that's more like 70%, and that's going to vary a little bit depending on whether someone is, if you're a rainmaker, you may be spending more time on non-billable stuff. If you're a manager, same thing. But with these numbers, your billable time in the average firm is, for the average lawyers, now 324,000, 500,000 in the best-in-class firm. So a big difference there. That's a huge area of focus when you start looking at making your law firm more profitable. Now we take the realization, billable time 324, best in class 540, realization rate average is 82%, 95% in a best in class firm. So now we're down to 265 billable in the average, for the average lawyer, 478 for best in class. Collection, now we start with the same numbers. Average collection, 89% in a average firm, 95% in best in class. 236 for the average lawyer, 454 otherwise. And if you wonder where any of these numbers come from, I didn't put this slide in the deck, but these are from Clio's studies, the annual studies they do. And I want to say there's one other, but I think we've got some pretty good data on what these averages are. And now we look at overhead as a percentage of revenue. So now we've got our gross revenue that from the last slide. In an average firm, your overhead as a percentage of revenue is going to be 45 to 50%. We said 50 to make the math easier here. Best in class can be 30% or lower. My firm achieved 20 to 30% in the years that I was there. So that leaves you a profit in an average firm of 118,000 for the lawyer, and 318 in a best in class firm. 318, 3 times as much. So let's just think about that difference here for a minute. That's $200,000 a year difference in profit between an average and best in class firm. Over the course of a lawyer's 40-year career, that's $8 million difference. So that's I would hope that would speak for itself, but let's just think about that for a minute. But first, let's talk about what really is the difference between those firms. The lawyers are doing exactly the same thing for their clients in each firm. So the real difference is the leadership and the management is the difference. The lawyers want to practice law and add to the top line. And whether you're dealing with it intentionally or not, the leaders and managers, who I believe are the people on this call, you're creating that bottom line. So that's your responsibility and your opportunity to do something really drastically different in your firm if you're more like the average and less like the best in class. So does that matter? So for lawyers, there's freedom in achieving best in class status. You are not as weighed down by that overhead. You are, have a lot more flexibility in how you live your life. My experience is I was much happier in my practice, and I think it allowed me more flexibility with my clients, so I could have happier relationships with my clients as well, and a much different retirement. So you're really looking out for yourself much better. And for those of you who are managers, this higher profitability is obviously going to help you retain your best people. I would think it's going to be much more secure and satisfying work. I certainly see that when I, talk to people who work in really high performing firms. I was just on the phone yesterday with Lisa Walagowski, who's very well known to you, who are in ALA, and she talked about how she had transformed her firm's profitability in the last few years when she's been there. And you could just see that pride and sense of accomplishment in doing that. And it just gives you a different understanding of your value as a administrator, COO, whatever you want to call yourself in your firm. If you make your firm into a best-in-class firm, you're producing huge amount of value for that firm, and that's obviously important from a professional standpoint. But the bottom line here is, if you are not achieving those levels and you're sitting at the average, you're burning $200,000 a year per lawyer, and who can afford that? And I think about I've done this webinar quite a few times and talked with a lot of people about these issues, and it's amazing to me how much people um, may recognize that they have a problem, but then inertia prevents you from doing anything about it. And that's so very common. I mean, there's a little bit in this webinar to talk about how you deal with that. That's a big topic we could spend a whole hour on, and will at some point in the future. But what to sort of give you some incentive here, I want you to think about this quote from Daniel Burnham. He was one of the primary architects of rebuilding Chicago after the Chicago fire in the 1800s. And of course, ran into a lot of people going, "This is too big. We can't do this. We can't do something as big as rebuild a great city." And his quote here, I really like it. It's like, he says, "Make no little plans. They have no magic to stir people's blood, and probably in themselves won't be realized. Make big plans, aim high." And he goes on to talk about how that motivates people to do more. And you really need that if you're making significant changes like we're talking about. You need something to elevate your project over the bumps in the road that you're undoubtedly going to see. So I love this way of thinking, and what Daniel Burnham was able to accomplish in the city of Chicago. It works. So for whatever your role is in the law firm, now is the time to start your big plan. Whether you're a managing partner, whether you're an admin, whether you're a lawyer, think big about your firm, because you've probably got a really big opportunity to make it more profitable. If you want to get a little more information about where your firm stands, the email following the webinar is going to include this financial report card where you can plug in the numbers for your firm and see where you stand relative to the best-in-class metrics. All right, now let's dive into compensation. So getting the right alignment and incentives in your firm. So when we think about what those factors are, I just wanted to make a point here that, money isn't everything when it comes to your compensation system. There's a lot of other things that are important: a positive culture, allowing for professional development, respect, flexibility, communication, and so all of that matters. But ultimately, this largely comes down to a matter of, how does your firm handle the money, and do people feel like they're well compensated? So, that's where our focus is going to be today. Now, with that said, there is a really important cultural component to your compensation system. So culture and compensation go hand in glove. If those things are not aligned and they don't feel like one follows from the other, you're going to have a lot of problems in your firm figuring out how to, with that alignment. It's going to feel like there's a disconnect and discontent. So your culture and your values should align before you change your compensation system, or unless you've already done a lot of good work on values and you're kind of set to do that. But the key values that you need in order to get best-in-class performance, because you're working in a partnership. A partnership is a particular kind of business entity. It doesn't work like a corporation does, where where you have a hierarchy and that really defined roles, especially among the lawyers. Everybody there is a professional, and everybody there has the potential to go out and get their own clients, perform at a really high level, and be a peer. So lawyers are, they're in a well-run law firm. The lawyers are peers and are equal in many ways. So you want values that reflect that, and those are values like fairness. One lawyer needs to feel like they're treated fairly relative to others based on their performance. Trust is super important in a partnership. I heard so many times in the course of my work with my firm that choose your partners carefully, because you absolutely have to have that trust in them. You're at some level responsible for what they do well and what they don't in your firm. So it's really important that there's a high level of trust, which goes hand in hand with accountability. That the lawyers have to be you have to be accountable for performance, and ultimately the only performance that or the performance that matters most is producing revenue. It's a business. And so if you're not producing revenue, even if you're producing brilliant legal work, you're not doing your job as a law firm partner. You're not really making the contributions that you need to. So accountability has to be really important. In our October webinar, we're going to talk a lot more about all about these values and creating the culture for this, but that's what you need to know for today. I always like to talk about this when I talk about compensation, which is that cash is king. I do not recommend in any sense running a law firm on anything but a cash basis. If you're paying people based on accruals, you're creating systemic risk for the firm that can get everyone in trouble, even if everybody has the best intentions. It's much better to have some discipline and make sure people are paid based on cash in the door. Now it can be a little different for associate attorneys, but certainly your partners should only be paid on money that the firm has received and can be distributed. I think it's really important that law firms retain cash reserves so that if something goes wrong, you can still pay your people. As I mentioned, I don't believe in compensating partners based on billings. That just creates all the wrong risk in the wrong places and the wrong accountability. Creates too many incentives to bill a lot and not necessarily collect it. I don't believe in paying partners a salary. I think that, again, that's putting risk on the firm when the risk should be on the individual. Give people a draw and allow them to take negative draws if, in reasonable ways, where the other partners, are essentially lending money to someone. I don't see a problem with that as long as it's manageable and doesn't, put other people's compensation at risk. And then when the firm does take a risk, let's say that you compensate associates based on billings rather than on payments, there should be some risk premium that is paid for the firm taking that risk. So just in sum, the more you're on a cash basis, the better off your firm is going to be in the long run. All right, let's talk about some failed models for compensation. And, I'm sure we could have a longer debate about what really works well, and whether these are truly failed or not. But here's my perspective. First of all, lockstep systems, which are like basically 100% equity based. Someone owns a share in the firm, they get a certain payment. Tends to be younger lawyers have smaller shares, and so they're compensated less. This is why a lot of law firms blow up if they have these systems. Is there's a certain point in a lawyer's career where they're maybe 10 years out of law school, 10 to 15 years, where clients start to look to them as their primary relationship in a law firm, and they and they own that client relationship. Well, that's the point where that lawyer now has the freedom to leave the firm with the client, if the client so chooses, and that's what happens in a lot of cases. So, if that lawyer is now a rainmaker and is very productive and well thought of by clients, and their compensation doesn't reflect that because it's based on a fixed lockstep system, the lawyer's going to leave. And that happens over and over again. I mean, in large part, that's how my firm was built, by taking those lawyers in at that stage in their career. We have LeanLaw clients who do that. I mean, that's their whole business model, is to go find lawyers in larger firms who are undercompensated at that phase in their career and give them a better place to go. So really don't think lockstep system is viable in today's world. I don't like compensation committees. I mean, you might get to about the same place with the compensation committee if you're using the same data and criteria as you would with an objective system, which is what we're going to talk about most of the time today. But there's always this a bit of and sometimes a lot of subjectivity in these things that is very corrosive to the trust among the partners in the law firm. You'll see lots of, closed door meetings, politicking, things like that are unhealthy for a law firm. I call this third model anarchy. Usually that's where there's a very strong founding and or managing partner who kind of runs the show in the firm, and they make a deal with everybody who comes in, and they basically, that's up to them. And usually there is not a lot of transparency about compensation in firms like that, which again leads to this distrust, politicking, backdoor stuff. People don't know whether they're well compensated, so they feel insecure, and that's very unhealthy. And the final model I want to talk about is what I call bureaucracy. And it could be an objective compensation system, but it's gotten so complicated that it's lost its connection to the values that you are trying to implement with your compensation system. So, it's just becomes unwieldy and doesn't do what you want it to do because it's just kind of weighing everybody down. So in case that didn't come through on the last slide, I'm just going to say it here, that I pretty strongly believe that an objective system is the best one. It's predictable, so it builds trust. It's flexible, especially when you run it with low overhead. People can choose how much they work much more because they're accountable for what they get paid. It really incents high performance. That was, it was very good for that in my firm. It is accountable because you are paid based on your performance. And then, these systems are often derided as being eat what you kill. And they can be but it's really not the system that is eat what you kill. It's your culture that becomes eat what you kill. If it really becomes rigid and it is, run in a way that really is harmful to people or without considering the impact on people, then it can be a bad system, and can force good people out of a law firm. If you have a culture where there's sort of a common cause and people look out for each other, and there really is a firm that you have created and not just a bunch of people office sharing, then it's not eat what you kill at all. And there can be flexibilities built in when you need it for people to get what they need in lean times, kind of get that hand up, get delegated some work where they need it, so that it works in good times and bad. So just wanted to make that differentiation. All right, so let's talk about an objective compensation model. And I'm not saying this is the only model that works to create a high performance firm, but it really is about the only one I've seen. It's the only one I know that can do this on a consistent, can create that high performance on a consistent basis. And there really are 5 elements of the compensation that people get, or what makes up compensation here. And it starts with what are called the Hale and Dorr model, which is a Boston-based law firm that invented this in the 40s, where you compensate. They call it the finder, the minder, and the grinder. So the originating attorney is the finder, the one who makes the rain, brings the client in. The minder manages the client, often called a responsible attorney. And the grinder is the attorney who actually does the work for the client. So how do you compensate those productive roles? A couple of other things that come into play: firm management, marketing, and intangible factors can be part of it. As long as they're a defined part of it, and these will be a little bit subjective by their nature, but it's usually not enough to matter if you've kind of defined a level at which you expect people to get compensated there. And then longevity and equity. I don't, some people just don't think that's relevant and don't have anything there. But if you're the founder of a law firm and built it up over 20 years, and then someone gets to take advantage of it and the client base and all the systems you've built up, that's something that is reasonable to compensate in a law firm. So that's worth consideration, whether that should be part of your system. So I'm going to present some typical factor weights, and this is, this varies a lot, and it also varies how, what people's baseline is for the formula. But using the, basic profitability that I was talking about, revenue minus overhead equals profit. This is what we've seen most often. Origination in the range of 10%. Responsible attorney, maybe 5%. My firm didn't compensate for this at all. Working attorney, 75% of the billable hour they bring in and get collected. Maybe a contribution to firm share equity of 10%. Management comp, say $250 an hour here. Obviously, that's a pretty high level, but it's really an opportunity cost thing. If you're asking a productive lawyer to come out and be a manager, they need to be compensated pretty well for that, or who's going to do the job? So that's in the ballpark. Different firms do that differently and have different expectations. And then total overhead, average firm again is 50%. Ideal, you like to be 30% or less, and that will have, that overhead percentage is going to have a lot to do with how how successful your objective system is. If you have a huge overhead load, doesn't matter how fairly you allocate other things, nobody's taking home that much money. So, that's definitely a point of emphasis. Oops, I went the wrong way again. All right, so a few other things about compensation systems. I am a fan of simple formulas, and that's for three reasons. One is because it ties more clearly to the why. So, and gives you some clarity as a lawyer about what you have to do to be compensated. So that's that trust, fairness, and accountability. If I can see, oh, okay, I got paid for, quite a bit based on what I worked. I got a nice bump for what I originated and got compensated for a little management time, a little responsible attorney time. That's, you know, I feel good about that. But if it's like, and what's this, referral fee formula and all these other things that we've put in to address particular circumstances, now it's so complicated, I don't trust it anymore. And so I like to avoid that. So that complexity can be divisive. Does that really serve your values to add that just to make a special deal for somebody rather than going, maybe that person doesn't fit our values very well, or maybe they don't understand what we're trying to do with our compensation system. The last thing is that complexity is expensive. That, uh, it, a software like LeanLaw does a pretty good job of calculating this if you've got an originator, a responsible attorney, and a working attorney. We can do that out of the box. But you make your formula very complicated, you're doing some really complex Excel spreadsheets, and somebody's spending a lot of their, who's pretty expensive accountant, is spending a lot of their time figuring that out. So are you really getting value for that, or would you be better off simplifying and being able to do something relatively simple? Okay, now we're going to go through pretty quickly some personas for how people are compensated. And I think these are the most important personas in the law firm. So really quickly, you've got a founding partner persona. So they're going to be very accomplished. They've got an ego to think about. They may value tradition since they created them, and they put their heart and soul into building the firm. So you've got that to deal with someone like that. At the same time, if they still want to be part of a firm, they've got to be willing to accommodate other people. So we've got Atticus here. He's like a new managing partner, also practicing law. He's really stressed out. He really would rather be practicing law, and he may have concerns about how well he's compensated for his management duties. Really important persona here in Julia. She's a hard charger, 40-year-old coming into her own as a rainmaker. She's really probably not compensated very well in a lockstep system and may not feel respected if she's not compensated well. And it kills you if people like Julia leave the firm. Francesca's a little different matter. She's a talented lawyer, but she's more interested in family and lifestyle. And a certain phase in her life, she may want to raise her family, stay in the game, ramp up her practice later. Is your system flexible enough to accommodate somebody like that who can be a really valuable partner? Marvin, he's your hard charging associate, often paid on a salary based on what the perceived market value is in your town. But he's chafing that he's working harder than other people and not getting paid for it. And then there's some people like Glenda, might be an associate, might be a paralegal of counsel, does great work, but kind of does the minimum based on what the expectations are. That's still a valuable contributor. So what if a persona is not on this list? Objective compensation can be really great for self-selection. If you have somebody who's kind of a marginal producer and needs to be pushed a lot, never makes their hours, managing somebody like that's really hard. But what if if you have a system where they don't get paid as much, if they don't work as much, a lot of times people like that will self-select. And along those lines, the firm's compensation criteria should be aligned with the firm performance expectations, so that the people who value most do well in the system. Those who there's no gaming the system to get paid more based on things like non-billable hours projects and things like that the firm may not value as much. All right, so let's take a quick look at how each of these systems work for each of the personas. So if we look at Horace, let's say he's a big originator, still does quite a bit of client management, working hard, does a little bit of management, a lot of equity in the firm. So, and we're going to say this firm has 250,000 in overhead, so kind of an average overhead firm. If you do the math on his equity, he's got a big share, take out the overhead. He's making a pile of money if you have a Lockstep firm. So, but we're having this conversation because he doesn't want the other people to leave, so he's going to have to give on that a little bit. But if you look at a objective system where you have pro rata overhead, so everybody pays the same overhead, he gets some for origination, for a responsible attorney, for his work, management. So when you add all that up, it's still 600,000 a year. So he's doing really well there. If you now do a proportional overhead so that people who have more revenue pay more overhead, he's down around 500,000. Obviously, big things to think about here. That's a big change for Horace, but probably necessary if he's going to hold this firm together. So now we look at Atticus. He doesn't originate as much. He's younger, does a lot of client management, not working as much because his management responsibilities have pushed a lot of that out. Still has 15 years equity in the firm, paying the same overhead. His equity, if you just pay him on equity, he's making about $300,000 a year. Not bad, but probably, as hard as he's working and stressed out as he is, he may feel pretty uncomfortable with that. We move to an objective pro rata system. Again, everybody pays the same overhead. Add up his totals based on our shares, and he's now making 400,000. Make it a proportional overhead. His overhead goes up a little bit, and now he's at 360. But in either case, a nice bump for him that is proportional to his contributions as they've been valued. Julia, say she's a high originator and does a lot of client management, hardworking. She only makes 297 in this system. If you do Lockstep, I think she's out of there if that's the system. When you do add her contributions objectively with pro rata and proportional, she winds up with 528 or 431. So you probably made her happy if you make a switch to one of those, certainly to the pro rata system. Francesca, she's our lifestyle partner, not working as hard as the others, doing a little bit of management. She gets a great deal if we in a lockstep system, but she's not as productive, so she probably doesn't have the say she might otherwise, to try and keep something like that. Moving to an objective pro rata system, she makes a little less here because of the high overhead allocation, relatively speaking. Probably need to make some kind of adjustment there. The proportional system works a little better. So I would think that, this amount of compensation would help her stay in the game like she wants. So you're probably going to be meeting her needs. Marvin, on the, he's not an equity partner. Say that there's $100,000 market salary in this market. If you put him through an objective system with as hard as he's working, he makes a big share there. He's going to more than double his salary under either the objective or the pro rata system. So you're compensating your most valuable people, certainly talent for the future. So you're probably making Marvin happy with the switch. And finally, Glenda, she's not a very high producer. Obviously, she can't, she's probably making 70,000 based on kind of market salaries in the area. But if you apply a full overhead allocation, obviously that doesn't work. A proportional one probably works a little better for her. So you need to make some overhead adjustments to make this work for her. All right, so now just to kind of cement all this, I know we went through that pretty fast. Let's take a look at this with a different slice. So how does everybody stack up in a lockstep system? Horace is the big winner, of course. Atticus and Julia probably pretty far undercompensated in that. Francesca does great. Marvin and Glenda not affected by it. But the fact that you're you're in trouble with these high producers is probably a reason that you need to make some adjustments based on that. If we look at a pro rata overhead system, Horace again at 600, Atticus at 400, Julia 500, Francesca down at 165, Marvin at 235. Doesn't work for Glenda, but probably pretty close for most of the others. So you may have something, a good starting place there for a formula that makes sense for this firm. And then just here it is with proportionate overhead. So we're now at 490. Horace is getting a pretty good haircut at that point. I don't know if that's going to work for him. Atticus and Julia also wind up making a little bit less, but Francesca and Marvin do well. Glenda does about the same as she would in the regular marketplace. So that gives you, and of course this is all a negotiation within the firm, but it gives you a principled way to take a look at that. And you can, get to a point where you can accommodate all the people you want to accommodate with this type of system. I will say this is a lot easier to do if you do it out of the gate at the firm where everybody buys in from the beginning. But that's just not where most firms are. And I would, I think there's a lot of value in firms thinking about making a switch to a system like this. Okay, really quickly, let me just talk about change. And because this is a lot to, take on in a firm, any change is hard. But my recommendation is if you if you're going to make a bigger change like this, and again, we're making big plans, we've got opportunities to fundamentally change the profitability of your firm. But when you do undertake change, there are proven models and processes to manage change. And just to introduce one, it's called ADCAR, and it's put out by a company called ProSci. And the ADCAR stands for the 5 outcomes you need for successful change. Awareness, people need to be aware they need to change. They need to desire, they need to want to change. They need the knowledge that they need to change, the ability to implement that knowledge, and then reinforcement. And something that's often not addressed is that this has to happen. Every individual has to get those 5 outcomes if you're going to have a successful change. And so you need a really good process that's going to prepare them, manage the change, and sustain the change. But you've also got a really big potential outcome here. So, and the clock is ticking, folks. So it's easy to lay these things aside, but there's so much money on the table that it makes a whole lot of sense to take this on. Later, we're going to put together a change management webinar that will talk about this sort of thing in more detail. I just wanted to give you, here's our momentary shameless plug for LeanLaw about just to, one thing to look at here is whether your compensation software, whether your software can track compensation on an objective system, something we think we do pretty well. So you can allocate originating and responsible working attorney shares, and it will create reports related to all that. And then you can also do distributions to all of the people affected by that, so that that is all reflected in your accounting system. You want to have something like that, or you're going to have a complicated system that you're implementing with spreadsheets. So in summary, best-in-class performance is going to give you a better bottom line and more happiness. I can say that from my own experience. So commit to it, make it happen. And it starts with a cultural and values alignment and adoption of a complementary compensation system. We think that's a really good place to stick your heel in the ground about adopting a best-in-class system. We like objective compensation, and it works for your most valuable producer personas and aligns with those important values for your firm. And then, just be cognizant of the difficulty of change and use a good change management system to implement changes like this. All right, so we've got just a couple minutes for questions. I'm happy to stay past the hour if we have a bunch of questions. Allison, what are you seeing on the chat?
I'm not seeing any questions related to your presentation, mostly just a request for the presentation and the video replay, which we will be sending out probably tomorrow at the latest, Friday, to everyone.
Okay, excellent. Just a little bit more on that. So we're going to send you that email with more resources. It's going to have the slides and recording. It's got the law firm financial report card I talked about, the compensation calculator, so you can run some scenarios for your firm. And then we have had some really great questions in prior versions of this, and we'll have all the Q&A from those in the information that we send you.
We did just get a few questions.
Oh, okay.
We have a moment or two. Okay. How do you calculate the proportional overhead?
Okay. So proportional overhead is the total overhead relative to the revenue allocation for that timekeeper. So, it's their it's their working attorney share plus their responsible share plus their originating share. So that's, what they get paid for. And then you make your overhead allocation relative to that. So people who earn more and get a higher allocation also pay more overhead. Now, I haven't seen that system, a pure system like that, used in a lot of places. Either people use a pro rata system or the overhead allocation is the same. That's what my firm does. Or there's, associates get this much, partners get this much, or there's a real detailed allocation, like you have 0.3%, 30% of a secretary that's allocated to you, this percentage of the office. I'm not a big fan of that because it's potentially divisive and it's also a lot of work to calculate. So I think some sort of hybrid system, either a proportional system, which works pretty well if your overhead is quite low. If your overhead is a little higher, maybe like a tiered system might work better. And if you do have, people chafing at the overhead, maybe that's a problem with the overhead that you need to, do try to lower that overhead either by increasing production or reducing costs. Other questions?
We had one more come in. Do you recommend compensation being calculated across multiple years to offset up and downs in certain practices, such as litigation?
That's a great question. Again, it's I don't like that. I like to have an immediate feedback. Now, I think the way somebody's got like a giant case that's a contingency case and they don't get paid for 3 years, that's where like a negative draw account can be used. So somebody can get enough money to live while they're going through that. And then, they can build up a balance in that draw account to, tide them over for the next time. But the more people are directly and immediately responsible for the financial outcome of their practice, I think the better off that you are. It's hard for a firm to manage that. So you want the individual to have that responsibility as much as possible. That's my view of the world. And I lost a contingency case my first year as a partner, so I lived on nothing for for quite a while there after that.
We had one more question. Do you recommend any base wage or have it all be objective?
For partners, I like it all objective. For associates, I think it, some sort of base wage plus bonus. And, that leaves the possibility there could be a clawback if somebody was really unproductive. But, I would just, not do that, or at least not follow through on that, even though you might have something like that.
That seems to be all the questions.
Is that it? Okay. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for staying over a few minutes, and I hope you enjoyed the webinar, and we are adjourned. Please join us next time, September 18th, for our Best in Class Tech Stack. We have a great speaker joining me named Misty Murray, who's with Aero Consultants and is a SharePoint expert. We'll tell you about things you can do with Microsoft SharePoint and Teams that you never thought were possible. So see you next month.